They knock at the window. It started with the spiders. Will would notice them on the windowsill right before he went to bed. They would patter as they walked, their small, plump bodies and long, spindly legs tiptoeing furtively over the wood. There would usually be 2 or 3 of them at a time, spinning their webs across the window latch, so that when he went to open it in the morning, he would have to wipe sticky threads from his fingers. He would hear them sometimes too, in that dead silence that only ever occurred on nights when the wind was still, the sky was starless, and everything felt lonely and far away. He would hear them, their legs creaking like old bones. Not long after he noticed the spiders, he began to hear scratching. Too loud to be insects, he would lay awake, listening to the faint scraping, wondering what it was. A loose gutter grazing the bricks outside, or just the wind. Yet, Will was always certain it was coming from the window. When winter came, the glass would fog up with condensation, and the walls around the window would turn damp with the chill. Will would often wake up with his breath hovering in the air, his lips dry and cracked. His room had always had a draft, and it was an old house with old bricks that had far too many cracks in the plasterwork, through which the wind and the spiders would crawl. It was too small for anything else. It was one of those silent, lonely nights when Will woke up, shivering. The wind had lulled to a creeping whisper. The street outside was quiet. It was cold. He tucked his hands beneath his armpits, worming deeper into the covers until they were up to his chin. He lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, watching shadows dart in the corner of his eye. The darkness had a funny way of seeming alive like that, as though there were something moving around inside it, creeping about unseen. Even the spiders were quiet tonight. He couldn't hear them scuttling over the windowsill like he usually could. He wondered what brought them here, why there were always so many at his window and never anywhere else in his room. Will froze, his breath stilled. What was that? He waited, listening, hardly daring to breathe. It was the scratching again, the noise of something being dragged over glass. Not the spiders, but something else. Will's eyes tracked over the room, coming to rest on the window. He had curtains, but they were thin and netted and barely stopped the moonlight from creeping through. He saw no shadow or figure standing outside, nothing to suggest there would be something scratching at his window. Still, it was unsettling, and Will lay awake a long time, listening, but not daring to investigate. When he finally did fall asleep, the noises followed him into his dreams, and when he woke up, he went straight to the window. The spiders had gone, but had left their trail of silvery webs. He brushed them away, despite knowing they would return again tomorrow. The next night, the wind was not silent. It was restless and angry, battering at the old bricks, crawling in through the cracks, chilling the room. Will woke up shivering again. The curtains had been left partially ajar, and he could see nothing beyond the darkness. There were no lamps on this part of the street, and the moon was hidden beneath storm and cloud. There had been a lot of rain during the day, but now there was just the wind, gnashing at the walls of the house. The window rattled. It was one of those old ones with a metal latch and no key, and Will had always worried that someone could easily pry it open from the outside and get in, perhaps while he was asleep, while he was unaware. He watched it now, juddering in its brackets. The curtain swayed softly around it. Then, he heard it. He squinted through the gloom, gripping the covers until his knuckles turned white. There was nobody at his window, where the sound was coming from. He was sure he'd have seen a silhouette if there was, the flicker of eyes, perhaps the glint of teeth. There was nothing there but the spiders, relentlessly spinning their webs over and over around the latch. The scratching eased off, and Will eventually fell back asleep, dreaming of faces at the window with eyes made of moonlight and sharp, silver teeth. The mists arrived not long after. Winter had brought frost to the edges of the fields, and the mist rolled down from the valleys, eddying around the town like so many strange specters. It was worse at night. The moonlight and shadows created an uncanny visage to the mist, as if there was something moving around inside it, something alive. That's when the tapping started. It was more noticeable than the scratching, harder to ignore, harder to explain. It startled him awake one night, dragging him away from his dreams. He awoke to darkness. Shadows scrambled across the room as he turned his head, chased off by his half-lidded gaze. When he blinked, the shadows fell still to the floor, curling like dead beetles. The silence in between each tap filled Will's breast with dread. Was someone trying to get in? He knew it wasn't the spiders this time, and no tree grew close enough to the house for it to be a branch dragging lazily across the glass. The room was chilled, but not freezing. There was no breeze blowing across his skin, misting his breath. He looked towards the window. Nothing. There was nobody there, nobody trying to get in. He was sure the tapping was coming from the window. It was that distinctive click of something scraping against glass. Feeling suddenly restless, Will climbed out of bed. He regretted it the moment his feet touched the floorboards, his toes curling against the cold. Despite the trepidation tugging at his chest, he wanted to see if there really was something out there. He padded over to the window, pulling aside the curtains and leaning his hands against the sill. The spiders ran along his fingers, scratching at him with their skittering legs. He brushed them away absently. The street outside was empty. There was only mist drifting over the roads, swaddling the rooftops so that even the sky was hidden. Another spider scrambled over his hand, dragging its web behind it, cold and fleeting. He was about to turn away when he glimpsed something moving in the mist outside, a shadow that shouldn't be there. He blinked, stared. There was nobody there. His tired mind must have imagined it. With a shudder, he wiped the spiders off his hands and climbed back into bed. It was only later that night did his mind comprehend what he had seen, and he dreamt about faces in the mist, faces with hollow eyes and hungry mouths and sharp silver teeth. Those faces haunted his dreams every night until one day he woke to something tugging at his covers. He startled awake. The wind was howling in his room, pulling at the thin bed sheets, stirring the dust. The window was open. He didn't remember opening it. He was certain it had been closed when he'd gone to sleep that night. Perhaps the wind had forced it open, or the latch hadn't been closed properly the last time it was used. Or perhaps someone had finally forced it open from the outside, as he had always feared. Will sat up, breathing hard. The darkness hummed around him, the curtains were billowing out, and for just a moment, they seemed to wrap into the shape of a figure, as though there was someone standing there, crouched by the window. Then they flattened again, pressing against the wall. He stumbled out of bed, dragging his covers with him. The air was clammy on his skin. Will reached the window, his chest heavy with inexplicable dread, and looked down. 3 spiders lay dead on the sill, their legs curled tightly, nothing more than black husks. The last of their webs flitted softly in the wind. He leaned over to grab the latch and had the horrible sensation of something cold wrapping around his wrists, like webs or slender fingers. Trembling now, Will tugged his hand free and pulled the window closed, slamming down the latch. The wind was shut out. Things fell still, silent. The dust settled. Will stared at the window, noticing a single ghostly handprint in the corner. Then he saw his reflection, sweat-beaded and pale. And behind him, a face with hollow eyes and an elongated mouth and teeth made of silver. The window had been opened, and the things that lived out there in the mist, the things that liked to tap on windows in envy of the living, had already crawled inside.